Hey guys, Matthew. In today's video, I'm going to bring you guys a full guide on General Cry Blade Flurry Berserker. So this is a league starter that I had prepared for, and also one that I even updated in my update video. But the reality is that even then, I hadn't really had time to really dial everything down. And now that I've really kind of tested extensively just about everything, blitz charges versus no blitz charges, how much attack speed do you really need, how much cooldown do you really need, and all that good stuff, I have come down to basically my conclusion when it comes to this build, and this is what I'll be showcasing and bringing to you guys today. So what I've prepared here is a bunch of different POBs at different price points depending on how much currency you have, and you know, it ranges from about 20x to about 100x. So even 20x, some would say, is a fairly, you know, expensive POB. But if you have any less than a 20x, then you should just be running the League Start variant, which is Ichimonji and all that stuff, until you basically get a Paradoxica. That's essentially the entirety of the cost is going to be a Paradoxica and a couple other things which I'll talk about when we get into that. But before that, I do need to obviously showcase the build. So here's a showcase of a wave 30 simulacrum that I did this morning. So as you can see, this wave has monster damage, attacking cast speed, +3 projectile, and monsters inflict Scorch. Now Scorch is not applied, but that's okay. And then a little bit of Hinder as well as Fizz's Extra Fire. So just to showcase that this build is capable of doing the most endgame of endgame content, here is what a wave 30 simulacrum kind of look like. So you'll see that, you know, compared to a lot of other builds, this build kind of really just blasts it completely. It doesn't really struggle with clearing in terms of speed. It's very, very quickly killing all the monsters on the screen. Now, of course, it will sometimes, you know, die to one-shots, but I've been leveling in simulacrums. I'm level 93 now. And, you know, I can do multiple simulacrums without dying. As you can see there, I got chunked pretty hard. But this is a wave 30 with some, you know, this says turbo and, you know, damage mods, Fizz Extra Fire, blah, blah, blah. And we are still able to do it just fine. We've got 2 bosses here, so it's also going to be a bit of a showcase of the sort of single target damage this build has when I go kill that wave 30 Kosis, as you'll see in a bit. But my current budget is much higher than what, you know, the POBs that I've made, except for the Super Endgame ones. I've made 2 Super Endgame POBs. I use Mageblood. Now, a lot of people ask me this on stream, is Mageblood required? The simple answer is no, not at all. Mageblood is a purely, it does give you a little bit of damage and a little bit of survivability, but it's almost entirely all just about quality of life, not having to hit your flask. That's really what it does, because those flasks are there. No matter if Mageblood is activating them or not, they're there and you can activate them as well. The only difference is you won't be able to Inkindling Orb them, so you're going to have a lot less, basically, flask effect. But the reality is that those flasks and the effect that they give you is honestly very minimal in the grand scheme of an entire character. So no, you do not need Mageblood whatsoever. It is a pure QL item. So what I'm trying to do here is basically bait Omni into the corner so I can go fight Kosis before. So what I do here is I do exactly that. Now I'm going to go ahead and head over to Kosis. So this is a wave 30 Kosis, and this is sort of the quick work that this build can do of a wave 30 Kosis. Now you have to remember that this guy's a very, very tanky boy. Now I had a little bit, got pretty unlucky here. I had to pull him back, had to pull Kosis, or sorry, Omni back. We're gonna go back to Kosis here. You can see I'm getting chunked, but I'm not actually dying. And, you know, I'm never really in too much danger. So here we go. This is what our single target looks like on a wave 30 Kosis. So again, I've done this deathless many times. I've even done multiple in a row deathless. That wave, I did get chunked, but this is the worst possible layout because this layout is very, very narrow, and there's nowhere to really go to hide to properly, you know, utilize your actual your actual arena. But as you can see, I'm getting 5 bars of loot in wave 30, so this is pretty good. Especially for a build that's not made for that. It's a build that is made to just annihilate bosses. So what we have here is a double HP. Now you can't quite see him, but there's somebody else in this arena right now. So this is a double HP Sirus Awakener level 8. As you can see, item level 84. And this is sort of the damage that you can expect to do on a double HP Awakener 8 Sirus. So essentially, we are able to insta-face him despite the fact that it's double HP. Another thing to mention here is that these bosses have a damage reduction phase at the beginning of their phases. So they're not taking anywhere near the full amount of damage that we actually have available to our build whatsoever, which I think is very important to note. So another thing, I think last thing before I go into the actual PoB, and that last little showcase is a lot of people think that this build sucks at clearing. That's probably the question I get asked the most after do I need Mageblood is what about clear speed? Doesn't this build suck at clearing? So I decided I'm just going to quickly showcase kind of a map. Now this got 40% monster life AoE. It's a T16 with Enfeeble, and it is Awakener level 8, of course. So I'm just going to quickly showcase kind of what a regular average map would look like. Now note that you will not have quite the same amount of move speed without a Mageblood because your Quicksilver won't have the 69% effect, but otherwise really is going to be fairly similar. Most of our move speed comes from the fact that we run Berserk. So what we're going to do here is we are just going to spin around, and yeah, so this is kind of like the play style. It's a Cyclone build, except it's a Cyclone that is actually able of targeting the monsters, and whenever there's no monsters, we can just leap slam around very, very quickly because the amount of attack speed we have, and of course because of Berserk as well. So this is kind of what it looks like. So to people who ask, like, you know, is it horrible at clearing? No, it's actually quite good. Of course, it's not going to be comparable to like some crazy headhunter, you know, occultist pop build, but it is very, very respectable clear, and most of our clear is coming from Asenaths, which I've come to believe is pretty much a mandatory item for this build, unless you're doing the extremely budget version. Then, of course, we walk up to the boss, we're going to put our tomes down and completely annihilate them, and there you go. Quick work of a T16 Awakener 8 map. Of course, that's not exactly what this build was made for, so this is not exactly hard content for a build like this. Alright, now that I've done that, let's go ahead and talk about the actual POBs. So I've prepared quite a few POBs at different price points, as I mentioned earlier in the video, and it all starts off at around 20 Exalt. Now, again, if you don't have 20 Exalt, what I would recommend doing is going back to my League Starter version of this build and playing the absolute League Starter version, because that one is basically cheap, like less than 2 Exalt, sort of cheap. It's extremely cheap. So what we're looking at here is a build that does somewhere around 17 million DPS, which is very, very respectable damage. The reason that we're not doing that much DPS though is because we're not able to reach the 10%, or sorry, the 10 attacks per second, which is our sweet spot, or minimum even, required attack speed in order to hit the release at 6 stages. If we could, we would get to nearly 23 million, but we don't have that. So I've put it at 6 stages just as a, you know, ballpark, because we were only able to reach 9.14 attacks per second. Now, I'll hop into the config a little bit later on. First off, I need to basically explain how this skill works and how the build works, because it's definitely a bit of a different build. So first off, what I want to talk about is some difference on the tree. Main difference number one, I have dropped an Admonisher. So there was this post on Reddit that kind of explained General Cry and the importance of attack speed and the downside of having too much Warcry cooldown rate, recovery rate. And it kind of turns out that if you have too much Warcry cooldown recovery rate and not enough attack speed, you can basically replace the Warcries, or the Mirage Warriors, before they're essentially done channeling, even if they're not even able to get to the maximum channeling. So what's really important is that we kind of get this balance, and we kind of found out that with around 10 attacks per second or 11 attacks per second, the sweet spot seems to be roughly, as you can see here, 1.69 seconds. And that is done very easily by, we are going to get Deep Thoughts and we are going to get Natural Authority, but we are actually going to drop Admonisher. And this is the case for even my build right now. You'll see that I don't have this. And this is actually going to feel a lot better. So this is change number one. Change number two is the usage of a Brutal Restraint. Now, Brutal Restraint does remove our ability to run Unwavering Stance, but that's not too big of an issue because we can easily make up for these stuns that are going to happen very, very rarely because of how tanky we are through multiple usage. Obviously, we have a Pantheon available if you want to go down that route. And when you have a little bit more currency, our Awakened Cast when channeling at level 5 is actually going to make it so we avoid interruption from stuns, which means that we're basically stun immune for free. All we need is a level 5 Awakened Cast when channeling, which we do not have on this build. This build does not have any sort of Awakened Gems because it's the budget version. But we're still not going to have any sort of issues with stuns, as you'll see when I talk about the actual calculations. What this gives us, this Brutal Restraint needs to be Nasima, and this is going to give us Second Sight. So Second Sight gives us You Are Blind, which used to be very, very detrimental to a build, but the thing is, They changed blind this league, and now it's really not that big of a deal. Blind is only decreasing our accuracy by about 20%. So this blind basically gives us 25% more melee critical strike chance. So this is huge, right? This is a more multiplier to however much critical strike chance you have, which makes gearing much easier. And as you can see, we have 70% critical strike chance without power charges. So we are absolutely good on crit because of Second Sight. Without that, see, we're at about 55, so it's a big deal. And this is also going to multiply the value of our power charges as well. Another thing that we are going to be doing here is we're going to be grabbing Soul of Steel for +1 max res, which we're going to be getting with another thing that I'll talk about, which is the change that I made when it comes to the items. But essentially, this is kind of what the PoB looks like. None of the rest has stayed pretty much the exact same. But one thing that you'll see is that we dropped Fortify. Now, you might be wondering, why have I dropped Fortify? Well, the reality is that Fortify did not work the way I thought it was going to work. I thought that if you got the Fortify Mastery, which gives us, merely Fortify hits, I would basically be getting Fortify no matter what, no matter how small my hit was. But that is actually not the case. Because our Fortify cannot be acquired through our Mirage Warriors, they can only be acquired through our Cycloning, and our Cycloning does basically 0 damage, we basically never have Fortify up. So we are just wasting a bunch of points on the tree, either here and here, or both, for no reason. So I decided to drop it entirely, because it wasn't up. It wasn't up most of the time, so it felt like it was completely wasted. Now, I did make up for those defenses elsewhere. As you will see, we are actually quite tanky on this version of the build, despite the fact that we have fairly low investment. Alright, so hopping into the actual skills, we are still going to be using Pride and Blood and Sand, but one big change that I've put here, I've put a level 3 Enlighten. So level 3 is, somewhat affordable within the 2025X price tag, but what you'll see is I put Purity of Elements, and this gives us you and nearby allies are immune to elemental ailments. And this is something that I've really come to enjoy this league. You can walk on chilled ground and it doesn't affect you. Burning ground, doesn't ignite you. Any sort of ignite, shock, chill, freeze, none of that affects you, which means that all of your flask suffixes can be used for other things and you can focus on other things elsewhere. And this is something that I really highly recommend, especially paired with maximum resistance stacking, as we'll see when I get into the items. Otherwise, we're still going to be rocking our Amulet of Choice, which is going to be High Reach Truth. I'll talk about how we fix the mana issues in a second here. General Cry, so we're in 2020 gems, no 21, no Awakened gems, nothing like that for the budget version. Obviously, still going to go with our main, with our multiple totems and double Ancestral War Chief and Protector. These give us a ton of damage. It's actually truly insane how much damage they give you. If you're like, my build does no damage, and you're playing this, it's probably because you're not putting down your totems. You have to put down both of them to really do a lot of damage. Cyclone, Cast when Channeling, Desecrate, and Infuse Channeling. Very important that you keep Desecrate at level 1, otherwise it's going to empty your mana pool extremely quickly. So that's kind of what we're rocking here. Cast when Damage Taken, Molten Shell. If you can get a Val Molten Shell, level 14, it's even better. I personally use that on my left click, so I use it anytime it's up. Blood Rage, obviously going very important for attack speed and for Leech, and then Berserk, Leap Slam as our movement speed of choice, and then Dread Banner for the Impale. Now, looking into the actual items of the build, we're using a Paradoxica, and we're going for a little bit cheaper version here. We're going to go for Critical Strike Chance, because again, attack speed is very expensive. I'll talk about that once we go into the next, a little bit more expensive version of the PoB. So what you have to remember here is that this budget of 2025X is about 17 million, and this is not fluffed, right? This is non-buffed actual. This is things that you always have. You always have Blitz Charges, Onslaught, 20 Rage is very minimal, because at anytime you're below 25, you're going to go back to full. And then you've crit recently, Warcry, blah blah blah, right? So pretty basic stuff. But Paradoxica is just Fizz and Crit Chance. Now, Crit Chance allows us to basically not need Assassin's Mark on our ring, which saves us a bunch of currency, and True Sight makes up for the lack of crits. Redblade Banner, always going to be our go-to. Abyssus, too much damage to really give it up, and with this version of the build, trust me, you're going to be tanky enough. I'll show that in a minute here. And then this is one massive change that I made this league. I'm going for the Brass Dome. Now, the Brass Dome got buffed pretty heavily. It went from +2 max rest all the way up to +5, and Strength provides no bonus. Now is Strength provides no bonus to life, which is why you might be wondering why I'd only have 4,000 life on this build. Well, the Brass Dome is giving us like 4,000 armor. As you can see, this build is 32,000 armor, and that is with, I believe, armor on a flask. But even AFK sitting in your hideout, you're looking at over 20,000 armor. So you're going to be a pretty tanky boy. And when your flasks are up, you're going to have no issues. Berserk buff effect is our enchant of choice because of move speed and attack speed. So it's very, very strong. Next, Asenath's Gentle Touch, as I mentioned, is pretty much going to be our go-to for clearing. This is going to help our Simulacrum clear, our Blighted maps clear, our regular mapping. It just makes the build feel so much better. And it also has a little bit of intelligence, which is nice to have. And it also provides us with Temp Chains. So a lot of people would consider Temp Chains as a completely wasted curse on this build. But the reality is it's actually really, really strong. Because Temp Chains on this build allows us to basically slow everything down, and it's an action speed modifier, slow. So that means that monsters that are chasing you, monsters that are trying to hit you, everything is going to be slowed by a massive percentage. So it's going to be a lot easier not to get hit by manually dodging things, be it when you're spinning around, but also just the amount of hits that are going to be going towards your character before you kill that enemy is going to be a lot slower. This is a really good way of getting tankier. The boots, we're just going to go with a bare bones life and resistance pair of boots, but it's important that we get Tailwind. Tailwind is a massive damage multiplier on our build because Tailwind gives us an action speed modifier, which is basically multiplying our attack speed as well, and of course movement speed, so the build feels pretty good. As you can see, we have over 100% move speed, so pretty decent there. That should feel quite decent. Next, the amulet is Hyrie's Truth with Panopticon Enchant. This is a go-to. Now, this gives us precision, 100% increased mana reservation efficiency, which does stack with the 100% on the tree here. So once you put these together, you can afford using basically a level 3 Enlightened. Matter of fact, you could even use a level 2 Enlightened. 22 mana is going to be enough. So you can save some currency there. Just get like a corrupted level 2. Alright. So now the problem is, if we have a Hyrie's Truth, which is a unique amulet, we need to get 3 crafts on this build for mana to have no issues. We need to get 2 times non-channeling mana cost and 1 time channeling mana cost, and we only have 2 rings, so it's going to be very important that we get a Replica Conqueror's efficacy. Now, this is not a bad jewel. It gives a skill effect duration, which, you know, affects different things like Valmont Shell, or also like Berserk, for example. But it also gives us maximum rage, which is pretty decent for the build. And then non-channeling skills have -9 mana cost. And then our other ring is going to have -7. And then our other ring is going to have -3 to channeling. So Cyclone is going to be free completely. As you can see, Cyclone has no cost for me. And then the rest of my skills mostly cost below 10 mana, which is why I said 21 mana would actually feel just fine with a regular bare bones mana sustain. And what this allows us to do is essentially skip the need for Kitaba's Teachings, or whatever it's called, the jewel that, Kitaba's Teachings. It allows us to skip that, and it's also much more consistent because our mana cost is basically non-existent. And if you want to run like a no regen map, all you have to do is throw in a mana flask and you're good to go. The rings are just going to be life and mana. Ryslatha's Coil is going to be our go-to for the belt. They're pretty cheap this league, about an Exalt. I think a lot of people are gambling them with Gwenin. And their flasks it up. We're going with reduced effective curses, which is going to feel pretty good. Attack speed, it's going to feel really nice for single target, especially. So it's important that you don't smash that too much. You want to use it when you really need it. Armor for defenses, and then critical strike chance to make up for the fact that we don't have Assassin's Mark on this build. And that is pretty much the look of things. Now, what I've done to decrease the price by a decent amount is I've put a 9 passive in terms of the large cluster. If you have an 8 passive, that just gives you a free point because this PoB is only level 90. But we're going to go with Battle Hardened, Master of Fundamentals, or Furious Assault, but it could really be any 3 notables. They're all just about equally as good. And then, of course, we're going to go with 1 cluster with Warning Call and Mob Mentality, and then 1 cluster with Haunting Shout and Led by Example. So we have Permanent Onslaught, we have Permanent Intimidate, and then this thing gives us a ton of armor, as you can see here, and Mob Mentality for our charges is also quite good. Now, the thing is, if, for example, Mob Mentality and Warning Call is really expensive, well, you can just look for Mob Mentality with any of the other notables that you need, and just buy the cheapest one, and then the other 2 missing notables get by themselves on a cluster. Basically, they're interchangeable where the notables are positioned, so if one of them is just way cheaper, then that's the one that you want to go for when it comes to Mob Mentality, because that's the expensive notable. that's pretty much the look at this build in terms of the 20 to 25x budget. Now, looking at calculations, if we get hit by a hit of 5,000 damage, right, which is a pretty big hit. There's not too many things that will hit you for 5,000 damage. That's actually quite a bit. We have 29,000 EHP and 76,000 elemental EHP, and then about 17,000 chaos EHP. But now that might not look that good, right? 29,000. But look at our maximum hit taken. We can take a maximum hit before we actually get one-shotted of about 22,000 damage. So it's a lot of damage, and that would take a pretty massive hit to down this character. Put it this way, when it comes to T16 mapping and early game bosses, you're basically going to be immortal on a build like that as long as your flasks are up. Now, one thing that you'll see in this PoB as well as all the other ones is that there is an open jewel socket, and that is basically to put whatever you need in there. If you're missing some resistance because you couldn't get it on your gear, this is where you slap it in. If you're missing some dex for your Paradoxica or for some int for your cast when channeling or whatever it is, infused channeling, this is where you'll want to slap it in, right? This is kind of like the jewel socket where you're going to fix your build, and you also have another one available if you so choose to just, you know, fix things up if you can't get it anywhere else. All right, so that's pretty much what we're looking like. 17 million DPS and some pretty decent EHP. Now, moving on to a little bit more expensive version. This one is level 92 instead of level 90 because, you know, you're investing a little bit more. You'll have a little bit more XP. This one is at 30 million, so there's a pretty massive jump in terms of our damage here. And this is, of course, non-fluff DPS, right? This is not accounting for, charges or anything like that. 20 rage, again, bare minimum. Now, the big difference here, the tree you'll see basically stayed the exact same. There's really not much of a difference whatsoever in the tree. Actually, I think it's the exact same. What you'll see change a little bit though is in the jewels, in the skills. I believe we're still rocking the same in terms of the auras. We're still rocking the same in terms of our support, except we are going to go with awakened gems. So this is where a little bit of that, increase in price is going to come from. The rest is basically going to be the same, and this is also where we're going to get awakened cast when channeling, I believe. Oh, yep, this should be awakened because it'll make you immune to stun. Cast when channeling, so that's going to be level 5, and the quality doesn't even matter. All right, another difference, because everything else is the same, is going to be the Paradoxica. We are going to go ahead and pull the trigger on a Paradoxica with attack speed, because this is going to allow us to get to that 10% or that 10 attacks per second, which is the sweet spot, the minimum that you need in order to get that release at 6 stages, which is going to make our damage feel so much better. Now, one thing to note about this Paradoxica is that the cheapest version is going to be the one with Blood Rage. Now, however, Blood Rage and the level of Blood Rage and the quality of Blood Rage are all extremely important, right? You're actually going to be losing damage if you utilize this Blood Rage. You really want to use your own self-cast Blood Rage. As you can see, 8% more damage from Blood Rage. So how are we going to go ahead and do that is that we are going to put our cast when damage taken set up inside the Paradoxica, because cast when damage taken is basically it cannot proc Blood Rage, right? You cannot automate Blood Rage through a cast when damage taken, so it's not going to support it. Now, this is a bug, and it's not supposed to work that way. But right now, if you slap on a cast when damage taken inside the Blood Rage Paradoxica, it's no longer going to proc Blood Rage when you kill stuff, which means you're only going to get your own Blood Rage. So that's going to be very, very important that you do that. So that's one of the changes. Otherwise, we're pretty much looking at the exact same stuff. We're still rocking the Brass Dome. We're still rocking Asenath. Still rocking the two-tone boots. Still rocking Highest Truth. But one difference that you'll see here, and which is going to really, really increase our critical strike chance, is that we are going to anoint Whispers of Doom. And the reason for that is because we're going to go with dual curses now. Before, we only had the one curse from Asenath's Gentle Touch, which was a Temporal Chains, but now we're also going to be getting another curse, which is going to be Assassin's Mark, which we are going to be getting on a ring, and this is going to require us to anoint Whispers of Doom, which is why our attack rate is not as high as it probably should be if we have an attack speed Paradoxica, but that's just the price to pay until you drop the Brass Dome, which is going to be what we're going to do in the even more expensive version. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. We're going to look for Life and Res, in this case Assassin's Mark, and then Life and Res. We are also going to go with a Replica Conquerors to go with a -7 and a -3, which is going to make her skills basically free. The clusters have no change, and then you have 2 jewel sockets that are open to put in whatever you want to just fix in and you know, figure out these last little things. Now, in terms of the defenses, it's looking pretty similar to what we had, because really all we've done is improve the damage. We haven't really improved survivability, but we're still taking, you know, about a 23k hit before we die and 66,000 hits from elemental damage. So that is pretty solid. Again, you should feel basically immortal in your regular mapping sessions, which, you know, should be pretty much the case when you're investing, you know, 40-50x into a build. But what most builds will not get is about 30 million DPS, because that is literally a 3 to 4 second, you know, Sirus kill. Oh, and that is including the damage reduction phase. So that is enough damage to clear everything in the game, the feared included. And with this level of tankiness, right, over 4,000 life, finally, with this level of tankiness, you're actually going to feel really good, as well as your maximum resistances being very high. Okay, next, we have the people who are, you know, a little bit more elite, and they want others to know that they've got currency, and they want to blow that currency into a build that is absolutely fantastic. And this is going to reach the 100x budget. Again, the tree is going to stay relatively the exact same, but one thing that you'll see that has changed now is that we're going to be grabbing prismatic skin to make up for the fact that we are dropping what we used to have, which was the brass dome for a rare chest piece. Another change that we're going to get, aggressive bastion, and because of we get that because we want avoid ailments on the shield, because we're going to be dropping purity of elements for some additional damage. You can see this time we went from, you know, 17 million to 29, and this time we're going all the way up to 45 million. And again, this is not like, you know, super junked up POB. This has power, no charges, and of course this is with 40 rage, which is realistic because we are no longer using blitz charges at this point. We are going to be using Rite of Rune, which is going to give us way more move speed and also just better feeling for the build and much better uptime on our Berserk. That's pretty much the only change there. So one thing that changes is that we're going to be dropping that that Purity of Elements for Tempest Shield and Herald of Purity. Now, Herald of Purity is giving us another 12% damage, which is great because there's not very many ores that give us damage for this build other than Pride. And Tempest Shield has really become one of my favorite support gems, or whatever you want to call it, one of my favorite auras in the game. This league, it made such a massive difference, especially for those endgame bosses such as Maven or the Feared, to be able to just face stack just about everything. And why this is the case is because it gives us about 20% or 25% chance to block spell damage. So we have 30% chance to block from our shield, the Redblade banner, but now we're getting 38% by getting aggressive bastion. And now we're also slapping on an extra 25% spell block, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is for some odd reason. I felt so much more tanky when I put that onto the build. Otherwise, the rest is really just going to stay the same. We're still rocking the Awakened Gems, still rocking everything else the exact same. Now, one thing that changed is, once again, we're going to be investing a little bit more in our weapon, because at this point we have 100x budgets. And in this case, we're going to go with attack speed Paradoxica, but with Dex and Int. Why this is because it allows us to save some nodes on the tree, and that's going to be very good. Redblade banner. Now this is going to be another one of the things very important. You're going to need to get chance to avoid elemental ailments on your Redblade banner, because we are going to be getting immunity to elemental ailments the same way that we did before, but this time we don't have purity of elements, so we need to do it manually. So we are going to be getting 20% from here, and we are also going to be getting 20% from our shield, and this is mandatory. If you want to make sure that you're completely ailment immune. Alright, next we're still going to be rocking the Abyssus, but this is one of the big changes. We are going to move on to a double influence astral plate. So this is where a lot of the price tag is going to come from. So what this is essentially is an elevated attack chest with elevated all res, and you are going to smack them together with an Awakener's Orb, and then you are going to craft on Suffix Cannot Be Changed, Reforge, Reforged Caster. This is going to guarantee additional curse, and then you're going to craft on Suffix Cannot Be Changed again in Ashling 4 in order to unveil, and you have a 50% chance of hitting your caster or your additional curse. If you hit that, you have to Reforge Caster again, and the other 50% is that it hits the Suffix Cannot Be Changed. If that happens, you want to craft on percent life and mana on your chest, and then unveil it for Avoid Elemental Ailments. When you do that, it's going to add up 35 to your total of 40, which is going to give you, very close to ailment immunity, and we are going to round that up with a ring implicit, as I'll speak about in a second. Still rocking Asenath for the clear, and just overall very good pair of gloves. Now, one other change that we're going to be moving along to elevated boots. So these are elusive boots with the elevated elusive and also elevated onslaught, which gives us attack, cast, and move speed while we have onslaught. A lot of our move speed on this build is going to be coming when we get those boots. We are going to start just flying through maps. And we are also going to be getting elusive as a prefix through suffixes cannot be changed, reforged, crit. This is going to guarantee elusive, and then we are going to suffix cannot be changed, and then unveil for movement speed. Again, it's a 50-50. If you fail, you'll have to try again. There will be a link in the description of this video, which is a Google Doc on how to craft these two different items step by step to make it very simple for you guys. All right, we're going back to Hyrie's Truth, but this time we're actually going to be using Panopticon. Now, the reason why we're using Panopticon at this time, at this level of budget, is because we get +1 curse on the chests, right? Which means we no longer need it on the amulet, which means that we are going to be able to use Assassin's Mark on our ring and get back to Panopticon, which is going to shoot up our attack rate quite a bit. And this is where we're going to round up our immunity to ailments. It's going to be on our ring. There, again, in that same document listed in the description, there's going to be links to these different items if you want to just outright buy them instead, like a base with a chance to avoid ailments. They're not very expensive, but they're extremely good, and you can craft them very simply using essences for life and res. Still going back to Raislotha, the flasks are the same thing, the clusters are the same thing. Now, one thing that we will add, however, on such a budget of 100 Exalt is a Watcher's Eyes with +2 Impale, because it gives us literally 15% more damage for about 7 or 8 Exalts right now, which is just an absolutely amazing deal when we're looking at a build with this sort of budget, when you're looking at elevated items and such. Now, looking at our defenses on this build, it's a little bit squishier than before. Matter of fact, as you can see, we only have a maximum hit taken about 14,000. So we are definitely a little bit squishier, but that is the price to pay for such level of DPS. Now, one thing that I will say is that this is deceivingly tanky. Now, it looks like it's really, really squishy, especially when you don't put endurance charges, but the reality is that this build can actually take a big hit. If you were to port in my character and POB it right now, my defenses would be similar to this, and I'm able to do some wave 30 simulacrums, and I'm able to do some mavens and Sirus and face tanks and beams, and I've done some 2-man HP feared where I'm able to tank a bunch of stuff. It is weirdly deceivingly tanky, and I think this mostly comes from our ability to face tank spells, which comes from Tempest Shield. I think that's why. But otherwise, it's a very, very solid build. And at this level of budget, for those wondering, which level of budget can do what content in the game, put it this way. The 20 to 25x can do basically everything, including the feared, but it won't be able to do wave 30 simulacrums. It probably won't be able to do like flawless breach stones, especially carries, stuff like that. But it can do the feared. Like, literally, it has enough damage and enough survivability to do the feared if you kind of know the mechanics of the fight. You're maybe not going to be able to do it super juiced, but you will be able to do it. You'll be able to do Maven, Sirus, like a joke, basically. It's going to feel really good. The 40 to 50x version is the same, but you'll do it faster, right? Your defenses are staying roughly the same, but your actual offense is going up through the roof, which means you're just going to feel better. Mapping is going to feel better. Bossing's going to feel better. It's just going to be faster as well. And then when you move on to the 100x budget, you're putting aside some of that tankiness a little bit. Instead, you're going full out on damage and speed. This is where you're going to get a lot more movement speed on the build. You're going to start to just fly through maps. And of course, with this level of damage, it's going to be a little bit harder to play the build. Matter of fact, the 100x version is harder to play than the 20 to 25x version because you are squishier. But even like I said, you are deceivingly tanky, and I showed you the clips of the wave 30 simulacrums. Most builds in the game can't do that content, period, and a build with an Abyssus on can somehow do it. So it is relatively tanky. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you're going to do Deathless on as soon as you get this budget and you can face tank everything. You're gonna have to be smart about it, but you can do it. And again, most builds just cannot do it. Even with 100x invested, 200x invested, they just can't do it, period. So it's really, really nice. Now, of course, this is a fairly endgame build. Now, for the super juicers, I've also prepared 2 other POBs for basically pure endgame versions. We're talking, you know, basically super perfect stuff. At this point, we're looking at probably 250x budget-ish or so on these guys. So those are going to be for the people who are absolute enthusiasts, kind of like me. And again, this doesn't even have Mageblood on those POBs because that's like 400x plus build, kind of like the way mine looks right now. But again, Mageblood, it doesn't really give you anything. It's just pure quality of life. Matter of fact, on my build right now, by simply putting in a Raislotha instead of a Mageblood, I gain over 25% more damage, right? So yes, I have to click my flask myself, but I get 25% more damage. Yes, I lose a bit of move speed, but I get 25% more damage. And this is 2x, this is 250x, right? So it's over 100 times more expensive, and it cuts my damage by almost a third. So, you know, it is what it is. But that's pretty much it for my, you know, pretty much full extensive guide on the build itself. Now, in terms of how it works, because I don't think I've even mentioned that at this point, it's a very simple build, but it's a very different build. So the way that it works is that you are going to Cyclone. Now, Cyclone has Desecrate with Cast when Channeling, and this is going to create these corpses on the ground. Now, you are going to General Cry, and it's going to, you know, use these corpses. It doesn't actually, you know, use them. You can do this as many times as you want. I think these just go away whenever the duration expires. And whenever you hit General Cry, it's going to use some of these courses to spawn these little dudes. And these little dudes will last for about 0.6 seconds. That's the base duration. They will last for 0.6 seconds, and they will either do an attack or expire after the 0.6 seconds. So they can only attack once, and then after that they expire, or they'll just expire. And because they last for such a short amount of time, 0.6 seconds, you need to basically get a lot of attack speed, which is why I mentioned multiple times in the video the importance of having at least 10 attacks per second. I'm at about 11.5, and that's where it really starts to feel really, really good, especially in terms of the clear. More attack speed means that your General Cries are basically getting their attacks done faster. And that's essentially the gist of the build. So it's a 2-button build, but at the same time, it's not a 2-button that you have to think about. You can literally just put, say, General Cry here, and then Cyclone there, and then hold down, you know, the 2 mouse buttons. And, you know, if you're somebody who doesn't mind doing that, you can just play the build by holding down both mouse buttons. I personally don't like holding down 2 mouse buttons. I'd rather have it on another key, so I have it on E. So I spin with my mouse button, and then I hit E for my General Cry, but that's really up to you where you want to do, what you want to do with your actual setup for your links, or sorry, for your skills. Now, one thing that I've already mentioned, very important that when it comes to single target, you put down both your totems. Now, this gives you a ton of attack speed, but also just a ton of more melee damage, and this does get multiplied by Panopticon, right? Panopticon gives you 50% effective buffs from Ancestral totems, and when you have 2 of them, right, that means that both of these are essentially worth 1.5 times each, so you're basically getting a free totem out of that, which is just insane damage, and if you're not using that when it comes to super tanky bosses, you're definitely making a mistake. So yeah, that's pretty much it for my guide on General Cry with these different price points and, you know, essentially what the build looks like in terms of stats and in terms of what it can do. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Before I go, as always, I do want to say a massive thank you to my supporters. So Kat, Tim, Thomas, The Great Master, Nate, Alex, Wolverine, Welcome Back, Stan, Scott, Reese, Mercury, Max, Johnny, Hamad, Georgie, Brandon, Axel, Rescorial, Nailed, Alex, Kevin, the other Alex, and Bitizen, as well as, of course, anybody else who's supporting me in the past and anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.